Hey everybody, welcome back, and this is Some Christian Guy. Today I'm going to be talking about the new report that was recently released by the American Psychological Association. This is going to be, well, for the moment, depending on response. I mean, I'm not particularly popular on YouTube or anything like that, so the popularity will be difficult to gauge, but it might be an 11 or 10 part series, because I want to actually go, unlike most people that have been just giving an overview, I actually want to go into the paper, or into the report itself, and bring out all of the points that they make. And one of the major reasons for me wanting to do this is because I believe people need to become familiar with how things are phrased, and specifically the Christian. I mean, this is a Christian channel and stuff like that. I think for the most part, a lot of Christians don't understand newspeak, as it were, social justice speak, as well as they should, and as a result, it's the whole entire social justice leftist movement is completely infiltrating our churches, and is of great deception to people. And people are simply not able to see this at all. They see things at face value. They think it's great, and they don't realize that the honeyed words actually come with a little bit of a snare attached to it. So I want to actually go through quite a bit, and I want to be particular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through I'm going to do the introduction this episode. I'm going to deal with the introduction only. So that you can sort of get the straight out idea of more or less where it is they're actually going with this whole thing, and you can sort of see more or less what their sort of presuppositions and things like that are, and I sort of reading through the whole thing. It's a 36-page piece. Not all of it is the report. A lot of it is listing references and things like that, and reading it, I thought it would be a good idea to do the introduction and sort of set the whole thing up a little bit. So without any further ado, this is the introduction to the APA guidelines for the psychological practice with boys and men, right? I believe that this particular report took several years to formulate, about 10 years or more. Right, I think about 13 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I could be very wrong. Now, to understand, to give you more or less of an idea of what this organization is, right? In front of me I have, and I'm going to put everything in the link below. I really encourage everyone to go and read things as much for yourself as possible, and so that whatever I say, temper it with what you read yourself. Don't, I encourage, obviously I would like people to, believe parallel at least to what I believe and stuff like that, and espouse what I espouse, Christianity and all these kinds of things. But you've got to make up your own mind. You got to live your own life, man, for sure. So anyway, so I've got a science article here. It was released on April 30th, 2015. Where it basically says the APA was hit with new torture allegations. So there's been a massive consternation, conspiracy, scandal, where the American Psychological Association was found, or at least accused of colluding with the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, to not only enable the torture of detainees, but actually promote and give them support, and actually give them guidelines on how to psychologically torture and detainees of war. Specifically, what's the most relevant these days is basically the war on terror. And if the CIA's reputation is to be believed, if we look at just a lot of their misdeeds and things like that, I have absolutely no objection saying that this is not only for detainees. This is going to be used on you. If they possibly can, they're going to use it on you, on the average person, and so on and so forth. So when you understand what the APA is, it's a massive group of psychologists, so 100,000 or something ridiculous like that. But the institution itself, you can clearly see that what they're putting forward is not objective psychological research and recommendations based on that. They're basically bought and paid for by special interest groups, and what they put forward is not actually for the best of individuals. And once we go through this report, you're gonna see it, right? They're there to push ideologies. I wouldn't be surprised if not only were they colluding with the CIA, but the CIA colludes with them to push various things. So that you can take that wherever you want with it. That's my 2 cents on the matter. But they're basically far too cozy with the government for my particular comfort. So the introduction says as follows. It says, boys and men are diverse with respect to their race, ethnicity, culture, migration status, age, socioeconomic status, ability status, sexual orientation, gender identity, and religious affiliation. Now, one of the first things that has to jump out at you here is there's one thing that they do not mention at all. They don't mention biology at all. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, what, men, or this is talking about men are biologically the same. And yes and no. We are biologically the same. We've got the same chromosomes, testosterone, all these kinds of things that make us up as men. But men as a group are very, very diverse biologically, in the sense that, for those of you that are interested, go ahead and look at the videos that I did on personality traits, right? Your personality traits, so the big 5 personality traits: conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism, openness, right? These things are set biologically. You're pretty much born that way, right? And so, for example, a man who is very dominant, very aggressive, sort of your football player jock type, will typically be very low in neuroticism, very high in assertiveness, and things of that sort, right? And very dominant will also be low in agreeableness. And whereas a man who is a bit more cerebral, he's a bit more quiet, he's a bit more reserved, he's not very macho or anything like that. So if just to use a stereotype, like he's a bit of a computer nerd sort of thing, it will typically be someone who's less extrovert. For example, he will be more conscientiousness, higher in conscientiousness, because they'll tend to be more industrious, more cerebral. And if they're very cerebral, they'll be higher in openness than perhaps someone. So, for example, a cage fighter. A cage fighter might be, they tend to be airheads, for example. Not all of them, of course, but the stereotype, the jock is a bit brainless, whereas the nerd is a bit smarter, more cerebral. So there's differences in openness and things like that. And this is the most significant difference between men, and it's all biological, right? So when we're talking about, the fact that the only thing they seem to do, they completely ignore biology, and they're just talking about race, ethnicity, and stuff like that. Now, when they're talking about race, even though your race is a biological thing, they're not talking about race in that particular way. They're talking about race as a political entity, right? Ethnicity, culture, migration statuses. So these are all sort of social things, right? Ability status. Interestingly enough, when you talk about ability status, they're talking about disabilities and things like that. And then sexual orientation, gender, and all these kinds of things. So some of these things do have biological underpinnings, but when they're talking about these kinds of things, you will see from the rest of the paper that they're ignoring the biology, right? They're ignoring personality trait theory completely, and they're assuming that all of these things are merely socially constructed. So we would recognize that there's biological principles, underpinnings there, but for them, this is all political, this is all social, right? No biology allowed. Well, of course, because otherwise you couldn't affirm a transgender then, because if biology rules, then you'll realize that being transgender or transitioning is literally, it's biologically impossible, completely impossible, right? Because you are either XX or XY, and that's it, right? So you immediately see where their slant is going here. It says here, each of these social identities contributes uniquely and in intersecting ways. Bear that in mind, intersecting. When they say intersecting, they're talking about intersectionality. Intersectionality is basically victim Olympics, right? Intersectionality is a way of determining how oppressed you are, right? And so, for example, if I take myself as an example, I'm a Latino, right? I was born in Brazil. I was born in Rio de Janeiro. So the fact that I am an ethnic minority Brazilian living in the West, that makes me an oppressed minority, right? And for those of you that have noticed that I blink a lot and that I have certain twitches, I've got something that's called Tourette's, right? Tourette's is considered a disability, and so my racial ethnicity, right? My Latino-ness intersects with my disability, right? And according to them, that means I'm not only oppressed in the one way, I'm oppressed in both ways because I'm an ethnic minority as well as having a physical disability. And this list can continue, and it's basically to identify who is the absolute most oppressed person in society. And I can only thank God that I was not raised according to these things, because otherwise I would be a completely useless idiot. And I would take no responsibility for myself whatsoever, that I have the responsibility to still be an individual and take charge and take control of my life, sort of thing, And then one of the interesting things as well, even though I'm an ethnic minority Latino, the fact of the matter is because I'm not a black Latino, I am less oppressed than a black Latino, right? So that's how absurd and stupid it gets. So for those of you that come from mixed race backgrounds, for example, I come from a mixed race background, you might find that if you go out in society, when it's convenient for these people, you will be one thing, right? When your example contradicts, supports what they say, then, oh wow, you are this wonderful, you are this privileged group. But as soon as your situation disagrees with them, then suddenly you lose your brownie points. So for example, with me, when it's convenient for the leftists, I am an ethnic minority, I'm a Latino, I'm oppressed. But when I speak up against these things, oh, it's because you're a white man, right? Then suddenly my minority status is revoked, and the fact that I happen to be Latino but Caucasian Latino, then suddenly I lose my privileges, and because I'm a man, I then lose my privileges, right? So that's how absurd, and it's not just absurd, it's obscene. It's absolutely it's obscene. And this basically looks at people not as individuals, but you are not an individual. You are basically you are nothing but whatever category you belong to, and your value comes from the category that you belong to. And if you are not in a category that is useful for the political agenda, then you're discarded, right? And that's just the way it is. So that's why a lot of people, there was a very famous, not very famous, but there was a very fine example. There's a girl called on YouTube, used to be on YouTube a lot. Don't see her so much these days, called Lacey Green. She was a feminist deluxe, total moron, right? But then one day, she decided to question a couple of things and actually started dating a conservative male, and then the feminists completely turned on her, but like that, and suddenly she was an outcast, and that kind of woke her up a little bit, and that's happened to a lot of people. So that's why these people, they can be your best friends in one moment and then completely rip you apart in the next moment, right? Because if you don't toe the line, then you become anathema to these people, right? So immediately here you see intersectionality come in, and intersectionality is utter, it's falsehood, it's satanic, basically, right? As it's just evil. So uniquely and in intersecting ways to shape how men experience and perform their masculinities. Masculinities plural, right? Now here's another piece of nonsense coming in, and we're gonna get to that later, right? And perform their masculinities. There's no such thing as masculinities. There's masculinity, and then men, right? Men are masculine. End of story, right? And then you have various personality configurations within that, which is why you get some very aggressive, very dominant men, and why you get men who are a bit more passive and a bit more emotional. But they're all masculine. They're all men. That's it, right? That's it, right? We're all men, and even those men who are a little bit more passive and stuff like that are still more masculine than a woman is. Okay? End of story. So how men experience and perform their masculinities, which in turn contribute to relational, psychological, and behavioral health outcomes in both positive and negative ways. All right. Although boys and men as a here we go. Although boys and men as a group tend to hold privilege, right? So there's that whole privilege and power garbage coming in straight away. Tend to hold privilege and power based on gender. Now here's the thing, right? It is true that men benefit in certain ways from being men, but men also get it in the neck in some ways for being men, right? There are pros and cons to being a man, and it's the same thing with women, right? There are pros and cons to being a woman, right? So this is just, it's just, of course, but it's like, how is this relevant? It's idiotic. Obviously, there are pros and cons to everything, right? And the reason why men and women need each other is because men can be strong where the women are weak, and women can be strong where the men are weak, and we help each other out, right? That's the natural way that God intended that we're supposed to be, right? But this complete utter nonsense where they talk about male privilege, where they're basically saying, in their minds, being male grants you are the world, the oppressor of the world, right? It's completely idiotic. It's like, as all men are rapists and all that kind of stupidity, right? That's basically the thing, right? And now here's where the cognitive dissonance is, right? Because now they're going to try explain certain things away, right? Because they say here, even though boys and men as a group tend to hold privilege and power based on gender, as if women don't hold power based on gender. Come on, right? Have you seen the way women are able to manipulate men? Come on, right? And who's got all the purchasing power in the world? The women have all the purchasing power in society, right? 80% of all expenditure decisions are made by women, right? They also demonstrate disproportionate rates of receiving harsh discipline, for example, academic challenges, mental health issues, physical health problems, public health concerns, and a wide variety of other quality life issues, right? And so on and so forth. And then they say for comprehensive reviews, see so on and so forth. So they're like, men have powers of men have privilege in gender, yet for some strange reason they still suffer disproportionately from, so it's like, well, are we privileged or not, right? And so now they have to explain away, right? If men are so privileged, they have to now explain away why men suffer disproportionately in ways that women do not, right? And if you had any common sense, it would be immediately, but they've got to explain this away. They actually absolutely have to explain this away, right? And bring in their ideology to explain it, right? So, for example, when they're talking about, like they say over here, they demonstrate disproportionate rates of receiving harsh discipline, right? So suspension and expulsion. Why? Because boys misbehave more. Why? Because they have testosterone, which is a biological fact on average. Why? Because biology, right? But biology is out of the question, right? Academic challenges, right? When it comes to academic challenges, why? Because boys do not learn the same way as women do, and the education system is set up that in a way that resonates with women more than it resonates with men. Men learn by doing, right? Not by sitting behind a desk and being dictated to by an authority figure. It's that simple, right? If your boys are struggling in school and you're worried about them, you want to do them well, send them to do an apprenticeship rather. Go and work with their hands, right? Forget university is not for everyone. It wasn't for me, and you can still be successful, right? Go and learn how to, build a truck or something, carpentry, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, right? Go send the guy and get an apprenticeship done, right? Go to a trade school of some description, right? But this idea that everyone has to go to university, it's completely idiotic, right? Not everyone's cut out for university, and specifically not everyone's intelligent, right? Now, just because university is not for you doesn't mean you're not intelligent. You can be very intelligent and have never gone to university. It depends on how you learn. But also, to go to university, you've got to be intelligent, right? And in order to make university and college and stuff more accessible to everyone, they've necessarily had to dumb it down, which then reduces the quality of their education, right? But when they talk about academic challenges, IQ plays a role, but no one wants to talk about IQ. And again, IQ seems to be a biological thing, right? But no one wants to talk about it, right? Mental health issues, again, there's personality trait issues, there's IQ issues and things like that, intelligence issues that go into that, and these again are biological and stuff like that. And not everything's biological. Like, if you have a reasonable assessment of the world, you will realize that we are biological and social. So it's nature and nurture. It's not exclusively one thing, right? But for the most part, it is our nature, our biology, that informs our society, right? And then society reacts accordingly. According to these people, biology is irrelevant. Everything is about society top down rather than biology bottom up, right? All right, so it says here, the development of guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men may help to attend to the barriers that lead to the aforementioned disparities. Now, again, this is completely idiotic, because most of the barriers that men struggle with are there because we live in a social justice world, right? So, for example, social justice says that women need to be able to screw around as much as they want just because sexual freedom, right? But the fact of the matter is that has resulted. So, for example, they talk about here academic challenges, that men disproportionately have academic challenges, particularly African American and Latino boys. Well, if you dissolve the family, there's no father, the mother is a complete promiscuous idiot, so she's got 5 children mooching off the state, right? Do you think that children in that kind of environment are going to do well in school? Well, obviously not, right? Because the parents are not there to support them, right? So, and that has been created because of leftist policies, because of the social justice garbage, right? And the ones that have been affected the worst are Latinos and African Americans, right? They've completely been affected the absolute worst, right? And as a result, so for example, they talk about receiving harsh discipline, so suspension and expulsion. Again, because if you don't grow up with a father and you live in a rubbish environment, and you are someone who is low in agreeableness and high in assertiveness, you're going to be aggressive, right? Because you don't have parents, reasonable, decent parents over there to teach you how to properly channel your male aggression, right? There's nothing wrong with male aggression, right? A male aggression is a tool. It's like a knife, like a gun. It's a tool. How you use it, how you channel it, is then what makes it either good or bad, right? But these people, as far as they're concerned, male aggression is unacceptable. All masculinity is toxic, unless you're a homosexual or a transgender, or behave like a woman. Then you're fine. Then you're wonderful. You know. To attend to, so this is completely, it's ridiculous, right? They're trying to remedy problems that that the whole this ideology has actually created. And it says, indeed, the American Psychological Association has developed guidelines for psychologists to work with specific populations, gay, lesbian, etc. And this has all preceded this particular report over the world. Now, here's where we need to pay very, very careful attention to what their intentions are. It says here, this guideline serves to A, improve service delivery among populations. Right? It's not going to do that. I can assure you. It's simply not going to do that. Right? And this is a nice way where it says, improve service delivery among populations. This is a nice way of saying we want to regulate the living crap out of you so that we erode your freedoms. All right? And how will they do that? Point B. Stimulate public policy initiatives. So basically, to stimulate legislation that they can bring in to force and bind the hands of psychologists to behave and accept one type of doctrine, political, ideological doctrine. And if the psychologist deviates from that, then lose their license, all these kinds of things. So these kinds of reports and recommendations usually precede legislative efforts. Right, so we need to completely reject all of this stuff, absolutely all of this stuff. Now, to get to earlier on where it says, where they're talking about masculinities, here's how they define. They've got a page for definition. Here's how they define this masculinities, why they're using the word masculinities, right? It says here, masculinity ideology, this is under their definitions. Masculinity ideology is a set of descriptive, prescriptive, and proscriptive of cognitions about boys and men. Okay? So basically what they're saying, that masculinity is basically how society wants men to behave, right? And what we either allow or prevent men from doing. Okay? That's the ideology. Okay. Fair enough. It also, they say, is a set. So basically it's their position that there's more than one set of ideology. So for example, in society you might say, one society might say it is good for men to slap their wives around, right? And by the way, there actually happens to be a society like that where, according to their holy book, you're allowed to slap your wife around if she doesn't listen to you. Okay, that's one society. And if you're a man, hey, you can go beat your wife. There we go, right? And in another society, but here they will never talk about this, right? That's a protected people, right? And another society will say, no, men need to be more in touch with their emotions. They need to cry more, blah de blah de blah de blah, right? So that's what they're talking about there. Okay. And it says, although there are differences in masculinity ideologies, okay, there is a particular constellation of standards that have held sway over large segments of the population. Why do you think that is? Okay, but let's go with it. It says here, including, right? So they're saying there is a particular constellation of standards, right? So basically what they're saying, in the majority of cases, people expect men to be, it says here, including anti-femininity, achievement, eschewal of appearance of weakness, so the rejection of the appearance of weakness, adventure, risk, and violence, right? So they're saying that for the most part, this is how they outline. According to them, these properties is what constitutes toxic masculinity. Now, here's the interesting thing. This anti-femininity is utter garbage. It is the case in some. Here's the thing. It is not, even in those societies where men are religiously allowed to beat their wives. Islam, right? The Quran says that if your wife, you can discipline her by beating the crap out of her, right? And if you read the Quran, is it the Quran or is it the Hadiths? It actually describes where Muhammad's one wife, I think it was Aisha, one of them, they were black and blue from the beatings, okay? Even in a society like that, right, they're not anti-feminine, right? They want their woman to be woman. The only difference is they want to dominate the femininity, okay? So they're quite happy. They're actually strange. It sounds quite weird, but they're actually pro-femininity. They don't want their females to be like men, okay? They don't want that. The difference is they want male dominance over femininity. And that's not the same as anti-femininity, as in wanting to get rid of femininity. That's not the case, right? So there is actually no male society that is anti-feminine, right? There may be those that want to dominate femininity and oppress femininity, but being anti-feminine is well, it's nonsense, right? Because men like feminine women, right? It's just as a rule. So that's a lot of garbage. Right, and to say, and for the most part, that is actually not true, right? There are very few societies in the world, most of them in the third world, by the way, okay, that have any kind of horribly oppressive attitudes towards women, right? But the social justice warriors won't talk about it, by the way, right? Like for instance, Islam. So the left absolutely loves Islam, even though they quite happily behead gays and beat women and burn women and all that kind of stuff, right? But yet, white Christian heterosexual males, we're the devil, okay? It's weird. So now here They say achievement is fuel of the appearance of weakness and adventure, risk, and violence. Okay. What's wrong with any of those? What's wrong with achievement? What's wrong with the issue of the appearance of weakness? What's the problem with adventure? What's the problem with risk? What's the problem with violence? In their own right, inherently. There's nothing inherent for, like, let's take violence, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with violence. It is true that violence is undesirable, right? But if I see someone abusing a child, then the appropriate response is a violent one, right? That man who's violating a child needs to be wiped out. End of story. It's not done, right? If you see a man beating a woman, for example, what's the appropriate response? The appropriate response is violence. You wipe him out, okay? Now, here's the interesting thing. The social justice warriors are constantly going on, right, about, and there's this recent Gillette advert, it's completely retarded, right, where that men need to, it's like, men have always, right, wanted to go and completely obliterate other men who abuse children and obliterate men who beat their wives and stuff like that. The problem is, if I see a man who's beating his wife and I go and grab him by the scruff of the neck and I give him a hiding, what happens? The social justice warriors will be up in arms and I'm going to get done. Okay, so the problem is created. The reason why decent men don't get involved, right, is because social justice warriors, this leftist, pacifist, idiotic mentality, has basically prevented good men from acting. It's that simple, right? So, bit of a stiff neck today, right? It's that simple, right? And so and here's the problem, a lot of the times, if we go and we get involved, let's say there's a guy beating his wife, and I go and I sort him out, chances are his idiot wife is going to jump on top of me and start beating me as well, right? At which point, if a woman assaults you, then she needs to be shown why you shouldn't assault someone who's 40% stronger than you are. Simple as that, right? If you want to behave like a man, then you should be treated like a man, right? But if you do that, if you defend yourself in any way, if you do anything other than let the woman completely annihilate you, then you get done up for beating a woman and you get done, so you're screwed. There's literally nothing you can do, right? You're trying to protect her, right? But if she's insane and comes on top of you, well then, hey, so people don't even get involved, right? It's not worth it. And who did that? So there's nothing wrong with these traits. So here they say these have been collectively referred to as traditional masculinity ideology. Additionally, acknowledging the plurality of and social constructionist perspective of masculinity. So here we go. That's what they believe, that the way we view that men are the way they are because society made them that way. This is utter garbage, complete and utter garbage, because the social constructivist view basically says that that society forces you to be that way, right? So for example, here's an example, and this is one of the prime examples of this demented mentality, because basically what happens is it removes the moral responsibility from the individual. So go to a woman and tell her, stop wearing makeup. See what happens. No. It's like she'll treat you like you've shot the sacred cow. Okay? And then ask her, why do you feel that you should be wearing makeup? And she will blame society. No moral responsibility. No, not I should be more independent. I should think for myself. I know that my makeup is bad for me. I know it's a waste of money. Etc. So, or just simply admit I do it because I want to. No, they will blame society. It's not my fault. It's not my fault that I waste so much money on makeup and I waste hours a day putting on makeup and faff like nothing on earth. It's not my fault. It's because society demands this and this and this. It's like, are you an individual or not? Are you responsible for your actions or not? Simple as that, right? So the social constructionist view removes all moral autonomy and responsibility from the individual and places it on society. It's always someone else's fault. It's always society's fault, etc., etc. And it completely and utterly denies the biological contributions to why people are behaving the way they are. So, for example, they say, right, so we're going to leave out anti-femininity because that's completely idiotic. But basically what they're saying is societies, and this is universal, right? This is absolutely universal. No matter where you go in the world, no matter what culture, those societies value a certain expression of masculinity. That is men who are achievement oriented. They reject appearing weak, right? That are adventurous, that are risk takers, and that are willing to be violent when necessary. Okay? Now, the question is, why do societies like that? Why do the society, right? And this is quite simple. If men were not achievement oriented, we would not have civilization as we do today. Right? Because men are driven to build infrastructure, to build the internet, to build computers, to build trains, etc., etc. Men are driven to do these kinds of things. They're very goal oriented, and this is not because society tells them to be that way. Men who are very, very high in industrial, which is a personality trait, high conscientiousness, and one of the subsets of conscientiousness, it is called industriousness. Men who are industrious will manifest this. They're not that way because society told them to be that way. They are that way because that's what they are, naturally that way. If a man is low in conscientiousness, so if he's in like the 10th percentile, there is absolutely nothing under the sun you will do to make him achievement and goal oriented. It simply won't happen. He will be lazy. Simply. End of story. Now, right? Why do you think society prefers an industrious man rather than a non-industrious man? It's self-evident why society prefers that. Now, look at this. The eschewal of the appearance of weakness. So men reject the appearance of weakness. Dear ladies, right? Do you want a crybaby for a husband? No, of course not. Okay. You don't want to. Women reject weak men. Proof? Look at the sexual social hierarchy. So the social sexual hierarchy is when you have removed the constraints of sexual morality. Right? So no sex before marriage. Only one wife per man. The Christian ethic. No sex before marriage and only one woman per man. Only one. When you remove that and say it's a sexual free-for-all and you remove the barriers, what happens? What they have found is you have the alpha males, you have the beta males. So you have the alpha males, and parallel to the alpha males are the sigma males. So the difference is alpha males are within the social hierarchy, and sigma males, they're as successful, but they stand outside the social hierarchy, right? They're a little bit more the lone wolf, as it were, right? So the alpha is the lion, right, who is part of a pack sort of thing, and wolf is actually a bad analogy. So here's a better analogy. The alpha male is more like the dominant male lion in the pack, whereas to keep with the cats, sigma is like a tiger. Is completely alone, right? And only comes together when it's time to mate. Okay? So you've got the alpha males, the sigma males next to them, and then below that you've got beta males, gamma males, omega males, and stuff like that. So what I found, right, and women vote with their feet. Okay? So you want to know what women are really up to? Don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. Right? And guess what? This happens to be a principle, universal principle, not only for women, but for men too. All right? For anyone. And does the Bible say it? Right? It says, by their fruits you shall know them. Which means, forget about what they're telling you. Watch what they're doing. Okay? So let's watch what women do. When the sexual restrictions are completely lifted off, right? What happens? The top 20% of men, which is all the alpha males, the top 20% of men, they get 80% of the woman. Okay, so why? Because those men don't show weakness, they're dominant, they're assertive, etc., etc. Okay, those are the type of males that they go for. That's typically, an alpha male is typically achievement oriented. They not, and here's the thing, when they say over here they reject signs of weakness, right? This is actually not necessarily true, because you can't, if you are naturally strong and naturally dominant, you don't necessarily have to reject because a sign of weakness, because you're not naturally weak, right? It is usually weak people that try to avoid appearing weak, all right, to pretend that they're stronger than they are. And one of the things, again, a biological fact, is testosterone makes men less prone to being particularly emotional and to cry. So when we don't cry, it's not because we're stopping ourselves from crying. It's because it literally just doesn't happen. It just doesn't come out. Okay, we're not stopping anything, right? We're not rejecting anything, right? Now, obviously, it is depending on the kind of on the kind of culture. If you have an unstable culture, then you will reject showing signs of weakness, but that's because someone might exploit you if you show a sign of weakness. So that depends. If you've got a stable culture where people abide by the law and all that kind of stuff, then it's not really a problem. But if you have an unstable culture where it's basically dog eats dog, then that rejection of showing weakness it becomes a more of a survival thing, really, than some, oh, I'm not in touch with my feminine side kind of stupidity. Okay, so it's more of an adaptive type thing, right? And it can also be ignorance, sometimes just pure ignorance, because a lot of men, if like they suffer from depression, they won't want to admit it because they don't. And that's just pure. It's ignorance, right? It's all it is. And the fact of the matter is that, yeah, women reject men who are crybabies. It's just that simple. And so you have all of these women. 80% of women basically flock to the top 20% of men. Now they do that. It's not because, and now this is not because women are being funny or being stupid. They're doing it for a biological reason as well, right? Typically, women are high in a personality trait which is called neuroticism, right? So under neuroticism, you have withdrawal and volatility. So if you are high in neuroticism, you very, very easily experience negative emotions, fear, and anxiety. So if you are prone to experiencing those emotions, then you will automatically be attracted to someone who is dominant, who can then be a barrier between you and whatever it is that you're afraid of, or whatever it is that's giving you anxiety, which is why naturally women seek out dominant men, because then those men act as a barrier between them and the dangers of the world, and which is why society was set up that way, right? So society and all of these things are responding to the biology. It's not society that's dictating it. It's society that's responding to they see the biological expression, right? And they say, which one of these biological expressions is the most desirable, right? So women will look at men, what's more desirable? So the fact that they experience a lot of negative emotions, and they experience fear and all these kinds of things. And this is fact. You can just look at the feminists, and it's all about rape culture, and I fear for my life, and I fear for my existence. It's all fear. Oh, I'm so afraid. I need safe spaces, etc., etc. That's what it is, right? And because these days, because morality has gone out of the window, and you have males who grow up dysfunctional because of broken families, etc., etc. So you have men who become who have then personality disorders, right? Who have personality disorders, who become dysfunctional. It's not toxic masculinity, it's masculinity improperly that has not been developed properly, and so it is then being used for the negative, right? So the aggression, rather than the aggression going into something positive, it goes into crime and social unrest and all these kinds of things, because they haven't had the guidance. So it's not the masculinity that is a problem, it's the expression that is a problem, right? So they're seeing this, but because morality has been taken away and it's a free-for-all, and you've got these leftist policies that demolish the family and remove all personal responsibility for people, you have these men running wild, and you have these women are looking at this and it's like, maybe we don't like the law of the jungle as much as we thought we did, and now, so we moved away from Christianity because Christianity was too oppressive, and now they're like, oh, we don't like this law, and Christians said don't do it because things are going to fall apart. Things have fallen apart, and now all the women and all the feminists and all these guys, they're like, maybe we don't really like this, so now we need safe spaces again. And we need, it's like they created this problem. All right? They created the problem. So there's nothing wrong with these kinds of things, right? And over here, they affirm, they say, acknowledging the plurality of and social constructionist perspective of masculinity, the term masculinities is being used with increasing frequencies. So when they talk about masculinities, they're not talking about the fact that men have different personalities. They're not talking about that. They're talking about the fact that they think that this is all from the outside in, that it's ideological, that is sociological imposition, and that's what it is. And basically, they don't have, interestingly enough, they do not have a problem with the fact that we espouse only one ideology. They have a problem with the so for example, they say, oh, why should you only have one thing? They're not actually complaining about the fact that we want only one thing. They're just complaining about the fact that we want the wrong thing, according to them, right? They prefer not masculine, decent, strong achievement men, right? Intelligent, free thinking, etc. That's not what they want. They want effeminate, pathetic, useless men that they can manipulate, right? That they can manipulate, suppress, continue working, continue generating taxes in order to pay and let the government do whatever it wants and let the world run wild. They don't want the assertive man that's going to step back and say, I disagree with this. This is completely and utter nonsense, and I'm not going to go with it. Right? Because if you dumb down society, if you make men who will naturally be the ones to rise up and stand against certain things and reject stupidity, they don't want men like that. They want malleable, placid, pathetic men who are afraid. And there we go, which is why we're having this shift. So there we go. That's the instruction. That's the introduction. And my next video, I'm going to then move on to the first guideline. And yeah, if you guys like it, if it helped you out, I hope it does. And I will see you in the next episode for Guideline 1. Cheers. Thank you very much for your attention. God bless you, and yeah, take it easy. Ciao.